All right, so welcome to the Quadrant Community Call, February 20th, 2024. Got 3 line items in the agenda. So I'm not sure who put in the first one with respect to policy code.
Sorry, I forgot to put my name in front of it. Yeah, so Mike's awesome PR to move the policy into the Quadrant operator just merged. So that means any policy changes or any API changes to the policies should happen now in the Quadrant operator. And the Quadrant operator, if it doesn't soon, will soon have a dependency on the DNS operator. So all logic to do with DNS should now land in the DNS operator. And that leaves MGC to be effectively just the, well, I guess we're thinking about renaming it to just be the OCM integration controller. It basically is just now an interface between the OCM APIs and Gateway API, and then the DNS controller and the Quadrant operator only interface with the Gateway API and policy APIs, and obviously like the other Quadrant APIs. Yeah, so any questions on that part? And then I'll move on to the next little bit. No, okay. Yeah, so I'm just wondering, is there appetite to do a 0.7 release with these changes in place? Does it make sense that we do that release? In my head, it does, but I don't want to sort of just force a release because, you know, just trying to see if there's any thoughts or opinions on that. Thumbs up from DD. Anyone think that we should do a release? Okay, I got 2 thumbs up. That's got to be quorum, right? So, all right, I guess we'll. All right. So I guess we'll move forward with that. I don't think. Yeah, maybe we'll talk through that a little bit more on the Slack chat of what exactly that release means, or we may do it on next Monday's call, or maybe both. Probably don't need to dive into that too much here, but I guess the key thing is to figure out, do we need to do a new release of MGC or not, is probably the main bit to figure out. Yeah.
It may also mean some rebalancing in terms of the scoping and what GitHub calls milestones, because we had a few things like that open for 07 and then the dependencies to other one. I think I did some work around that, so we may need to sort of adjust for that so that it reflects what we're doing. Not a big deal, just saying it's a work item.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so I'll bring it up in Slack and people can chime in with what we think we need to do to actually get to that 0.7 release. Yeah, okay. So I got the next one too. So with the distributed DNS work, we were at first sort of trying to figure out how to do peer-to-peer health checks as part of that. That added quite a lot of overhead and complexity. And so in the interest of, well, there's a couple of reasons for it, but which I can go into, but in the interest of reducing some of that complexity around that particular solution, we want to propose moving back to using cloud provider health checks instead of health checks that we provide. The good news is that should probably reduce the resource usage. So that was one issue that it will solve. The second interesting thing is, I think from an end user perspective, particularly if you're thinking about putting this into production, we're now leveraging something that you're going to be familiar with. Like you'll already be using that cloud provider. You're already using it for DNS. So leveraging their health checks should be something that's not too scary. versus our peer-to-peer checks would be something that would take a while for someone to probably get their heads around, and then they may be a little bit wary about putting it into production. It doesn't mean we won't go down that road at some point in the future. Just for now, we've kind of parked that idea. It means some additional work because we never did the health checks for the Google DNS or Azure DNS. In fact, we never did Azure DNS at all. So it now means that when we add Azure DNS, we also add health checks for that provider. We reinstate the AWS checks they were already in the code, and add checks for Google Cloud DNS. The bad side of this, I guess, is that we now need to maintain 3 different mechanisms, all 3 different interfaces, or 3 different approaches to how you set up a health check, which hopefully we can unify behind a single interface. But yeah, that's a little bit more complexity in that way, but is less complex than trying to get the peer-to-peer health checks working and getting the different clusters interacting with each other cluster's IP addresses. So yeah, the health checks, at least in AWS, we probably just need to refamiliarize ourselves with what's in Azure and Google DNS. I know we did that some time ago, but it doesn't actually remove the IP address from the zone. It just removes it from the response. So it means the zone stays in a consistent state. One other trade-off to this is if you have a private IP address, then these health checks won't work for you because the public cloud provider won't be able to reach into your private network, at least not without some work. So yeah, that's a trade-off.
Yeah, question. Does this mean that you would set it up from Kuadrant, but then to actually know the health, you'd have to go to your provider? Is that correct to understand it like that?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for that because I can't remember what we did with AWS right now. But I guess ideally, if we could, we would report it back into the DNS
right
policy.
Yes, I was hoping you would.
I just can't remember what we did before, but I think ideally we would try to report that back to avoid you having to go somewhere else to see if it's working or not.
I don't think that there is reporting back on that.
There isn't reporting back, or
Not
there
without-
wasn't, or there isn't.
I don't think there was. I can't imagine how there would be without some sort of polling against the API.
Yeah. Okay. So that may be another trade-off, Thomas. But I guess we'll have to do a little bit of looking into that to be 100% certain. It's still, even if that's the case, if we can assure that the health checks are in place, that's one piece of that puzzle solved. And then knowing that they're failing, yeah, that's a question that we've got open, and I guess we can try and figure out if there's a way we can find that out, but there may not be.
Yeah, I'm just wondering then, why would somebody then not just go to their provider directly and set it up there as well? Where like there's less reasons for doing it from what are we adding to the mix?
I guess I would say that you can declare it all in one place rather than having to log in and do it separately. So the setup is done for you, even if you can't necessarily see if they're succeeding or failing. You're still got like a single setup rather than logging into the DNS provider after setting up your DNS policy and then setting up a health check completely separately. It is an option that we drop it all completely and let them set it up themselves directly, but yeah, I guess that one's open for debate.
Yeah, I'm just playing devil's advocate, of course, but yeah, thanks.
Alex, I think you were next.
So if I use Route 53 or whatever it is, right, from AWS, I can absolutely use that to balance workload across cloud providers, right? I could have like one cluster with Google. Okay. So for the health check, if we need to do that, like, how would that work in such a case?
So the health check in AWS, at least, it has to be like a publicly addressable.
Okay, so it doesn't care. Like
yeah.
it will just check at the whether. Okay.
It's as far as I understand it, it's fairly simple. You're just making like a GET request.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
But it distributes the health check around the globe, which is interesting, right? That's not something that we can easily do, obviously.
Yeah.
But it then forms a consensus from all of the different health checkers to verify to decide if the endpoint meets healthy or unhealthy criteria. Thanks, Roy. Peter?
Yeah, I would just like to follow up on what Thomas said and actually fully agree with what he said. I think if we are gonna do this, I would suggest we do it with. I would say we should do it only if we can actually get the status back and report it at our level, right? And either we drop it completely, or I think we should do it fully and have it be ready at our place. You can configure it for Kuadrant and you can see the results in Kuadrant.
Possibly. When I think about this configuring of DNS, like you have a DNS record that is then synced to the cloud provider, and we can set in the status that that record set has been published to the provider, but we can't say to you that's now gone to all the different name servers. And so like there's a line at which we can no longer report the
Right.
status.
I mean the status of the health check, right? If it's failing
Right,
or not failing.
Right, but I'm using that. I guess I'm using the DNS as an example, right? We can say certain things like we have written this set of records to the API and we've got a 200 response. So as far as we're concerned, AWS has accepted it,
Okay.
and it is in place as it should be. So you could say the same thing about the health check. We've written the health check to the API. It's been accepted with a 200 OK. So as far as we're concerned, AWS has accepted that health check and will act on it. If there's no
okay.
reason, if there's no reasonable way to know that that health check is succeeding or failing, then like we can't get information that's not there, right?
Right. If it's not possible, of course, we are not gonna do it. I would just prefer it as an option. And then if it's not possible, I think we should probably decide if we even want the health check to begin with. As I don't currently see a value proposition in that.
Do you not see any value in declaring that health check in the same place as your DNS policy?
All right. If I cannot check if it's failing, then yes. But I still have to check 2 places. One for declaration and one for actually viewing the value.
So I would anticipate that if I was setting up stuff in AWS, I would probably use some kind of automation, and I would see value in defining that health check in a file that I could see in Git, and not
Okay.
just in the cloud provider. So that
Yeah,
I
maybe
can replicate that.
Yeah, maybe I'm just don't see it yet, and it's actually there, and I just don't understand. That's also possible as well. But yeah, definitely this is a move to the right, in right direction.
Let me capture something here. Okay. Everybody happy with
Would you-
those outcomes?
Would you mind just adding the link that Roy has put into chat into there as well?
Yeah. Yeah, Thomas?
Yeah, one more, like, I guess out of scope question. Like, the whole DNS story, is that, like, so far I'm understanding it as a 100% platform engineering story. Is that correct? Or is there some app developer part to this in the future that you can see?
There's no app developer story as part of the Epic brief or as part of what we're developing at the moment. I mean, I believe Guy identified a potential use case for the developer being able to declare it at the HTTP route, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. I can try to find the issue and the link there.
Yeah, so there may be something in the future, Thomas, but as of right now, it's for the platform engineer.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anything else in this one? All right, I'll hand it over to Alex then.
Okay, so part of Guy, to push him under the bus yet again, proposal for defaults and overrides. There's a section that talks about using cell expressions, so the common expression language from Google that already is being used in other places in Kubernetes for validation purposes, for instance. To use that expression language. When I was doing the work that I shelved for now, but for the well-known attributes, so that introduces typing. So I'm gonna pick on timestamp as an example for now. So I needed a way to sort of deal with those types and do useful things with what those type instance represent, right? So I opened a PR. Well, I don't know. I pushed a branch at the very least with something that effectively folds an entire cell interpreter inside Authorina, Limitador. And then writing sort of, there used to be tests that were supposed to validate that invalid conditions like fail are not supported. And I didn't necessarily realize that back then, but actually cell is more than a language. It comes with a bunch of predefined functions, comes with predefined macros, which again, some of them are really useful, right? Extracting the day of the week that timestamp represents is something that's useful. Being able to know if a key is defined within the map is useful. Know the length of a list is useful. Is just so that's all nice and good. But so the one condition that for which there was a test that was supposed to fail is we didn't have support for logical operators in conditions in Limitador. So ampersand, or. So logical and, logical or, logical XOR. And so all of a sudden now we have that, which is weird in a way, because today Limitador supports a list of conditions that all need to evaluate to true in order for the limit to apply. So they were all and together. So now you don't need that anymore because of self-supporting logical operators. In one of the links that I think I put there, there is this sort of probably crazy idea that he seeded in my brain with regards to using cell expression for more stuff inside policies. I guess the point I'm raising is cell sounds very good, but comes with a whole lot of power, and I don't know how I feel about this power. Now, I don't know exactly all the leeway that we have elsewhere, but I started looking at what it would mean in Limitador, for instance. I could absolutely remove the support for logical operators, for instance, as part of the supported features of cell within a condition. So that now all of a sudden you couldn't do condition one as one condition, expression one that evaluates to a Boolean Boolean value, and another one, right? I could remove the support for that. I could add the support for only or, so that you could say either this or that one. That works. Then there's more stupid questions, like the cell expression could return an integer, right? So what does it mean? Is 0 false and any other value is true, or what does that mean? So it opens like many questions like this because of all the power that comes with it. And yeah, and I guess I wanted to sort of hear what people think about all that. Like, so should we go for cell? Should we go for a trimmed down version of cell? Should we maybe go for cell and all the visible stuff where it makes sense? When I say visible, I mean Kuadrant APIs, which then possibly at the limitador level wouldn't be a cell expression, would be a different expression language that just supports a very limited set of things, and the Kuadrant operator or somebody, before it pushes all that to limitador, I don't know, transforms it into a way that makes sense. And in case you express something that doesn't make sense, the error happens at a higher level of abstraction. So anyways, I hear more and more about cell, and I just wanted to sort of get people's opinion on all that. What do you think? Guy?
Thanks, Alex. Actually, I have multiple things to say on this topic. Starting that I too have been hearing more and more about cell and been seeing being more and more used all over. In fact, I remember that one of the reasons why we didn't go with cell before was because we were for our policies and the kind of a condition that you can express in our other policies, if I remember correctly, was because we wanted something more Kubernetes-like, if you will, right? And that was back in the days when we were thinking on anything they would put in a YAML would have to be structured in the form of fields broken down, right? As opposed to one single string that represents a condition. But now things changed a lot, and even Kubernetes itself has been relying a lot on cell, right? In fact, people have been more and more replacing things like validating webhooks with just cell expressions added in their resource definitions, custom resource definitions, right? So that's my first comment. So cell is kind of a big deal where we should definitely look into it. Then I also have a few concerns on top of the one that you already mentioned, and related to the power of cell, right? The power of expression of the language. And there are more specific ones, right, for our particular usage. You provided 3 links there in that line in the document, right? Of 3 different places where we discussed or raised the idea of using cells, right? Using cell expressions. One of them is, you already said, it's in the limiter conditions, right? Which it's not exposed to users, right? So that would be in the the contrary of just described, right? So something that it's not exposed to users. So we could have something else exposed to users, but translate into cell, and then limitador would support evaluating cell expressions, right? So if I understood correctly, that first reference. And the other two references, they are different, right? So they are for they are in the scope of the discussion for defaults and overrides, and therefore related to very soon we having to handle merges between policies, where the cell expressions would be used as a way for users to provide additional information for the policy controller to perform those merges, right? Effectively for the users to express conditions for performing those merges, right? And those are exposed to users. But on the other hand, each individual cell expression is still treated separately, independently, in the sense that for that particular application, we wouldn't have to handle merges of cell expressions themselves, if you know what I mean, right? So I think that's kind of puts more or less a limit of where I see those cell expressions being used and where I see a risk for them, right? So if we're planning on enabling those as a language for users to express conditions, and if we need to do some calculations with those conditions, like between those conditions, such as merging those conditions into bigger expressions, right? I wonder if that could be a problem, or maybe not. Maybe the same way we currently can merge the kind of condition we support in our policies, in a not policy or in a rate limit policy, that are quite well structured fields, triples effectively, right? Composed of a selector, an operator, and an operand, right? And a value. That's relatively easy for us to handle merges of sets of conditions into one bigger set, right? I don't know if the same thing would be true for the cell expressions. Maybe yes, maybe it's only a matter of adding AND conditions or whatever condition that we use for the language we currently support, and it's okay, or maybe not. But I would like to raise this as one of my concerns on top of the one that you mentioned already, right? Especially because of the one that you mentioned, because they are so powerful. Could it be if we open this also for rate limited policy and all policy conditions, if we could be running into trouble there? So that's one, right? I see Agus has his hand raised. Very quickly, Agus, I just would like to add another one, because Alex mentioned about macros and functions that you can implement in cell conditions. I would also like to remember that in the current kind of conditions or language to express conditions in Altorino particularly, we also have a similar thing, right? So it also comes with a language that supports functions and value transformations. So I think in case we ever consider replacing that with cell, I would expect that the same kind of thing you could do in those in that language, we would also be able to support in cell. Sorry, a lot of rambling. I can try to summarize those in bullet points in the document, but hopefully you were able to follow the points here, Alex. Yep. Agus?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, very quickly. I want to put it simple. First of all, I find this very cool feature to start with. It would be very nice that at the gateway side, I say, hey, send the time request time to limitador, and in limitador I can describe my counter based on, hey, I want to get the time out of the request time, and I only apply my counter during the daylight, and I don't care of the night. Something like that. I think it's very cool. It will provide very concise, very nice way of representing your rules. That being said, I also have my concerns because the Envoy's rate limit protocol was designed with strings, meaning that everything that goes from Envoy to limitador are strings, no type. However, when you ask to Envoy for attributes like request time, headers, blah, 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 you get different types. You get strings, you get integers, you get timestamps, you get maps, you get lists. So if we will need to transform those types to a string, serialize, and then in limitador deserialize and apply those nice functions. So I think there is a reason for defining rate limit service protocol from Envoy to limitador or whatever rate limiting service there is. Only for strings, it's because they want to abstract and they won't want to lock to any kind of implementation. Those are keys and values and strings. You do your thing. And last, this is one of the concerns. And my last concern is, according to the feedback we've got from rate limiting services going on production, I'm talking about mainly on three-scale use case in SaaS, they are happy enough with the currently existing operator, which is equality. I want if the counter is there, sorry, if the descriptor is there, my counter applies. If it's not there, my counter doesn't apply. To be honest, the existing use case that we know of, I know of, are only based on, let's call it, infra rate limiting. So if we are looking at more high-level rate limiting use cases, and I'm thinking on plans and things like that, maybe these new high-level functions may have a point. So my last point is a concern, but also a potential feature to support the plans and high-level rate limiting use cases. So yeah, that's it.
Just sorry, Craig, jumping the line here, but just because you also wrote it down, the reason I got to sell actually in limitador is because of that very concern, right? Cell gives me string literals, literals for all those types, which means I can send them to limitador using the Envoy protocol, whilst not losing the type information, right? Because now all of a sudden they're effectively themselves cell expressions, right? So I can send a timestamp and it's parsable as a timestamp. I can send a map, I can send a list, I can send all those things. So actually I'm not sure if it's a concern per se, because it's actually something that was looking into because of the typing stuff in the attributes, how to not be lossy around that and send it in a meaningful way to limitador. So actually it is, I'm not sure, probably more of a pro than a con or anything, or it actually solves a problem, just to be clear. Sorry, Craig, you have your hand up.
I don't have a strong opinion on the limitador thing. I just wanted to add a sort of general thought that I dropped it in chat here, but like in auth config, we use Rego. That is also a bit of a foot gun, but it is a great way for people to be able to do things that maybe auth config can't express directly. So I put it into Slack. I was very excited when I saw that idea in the proposal. I do think it needs careful thought, but I think the possibility here is quite powerful. I guess the question being asked is it too powerful? But yeah, I guess like something that kind of reassures me anecdotally is that it is being used in the Kubernetes APIs, in the CRDs, and so it's already heavily being used in that way. Yeah, and I guess I wanted to ask Guy as well about Rego. What was the reason for Rego going into auth config, and does that existing give you more cause for concern or less cause for concern around the use of cell?
Definitely more concerns than using cell. I think Rego can be even more sophisticated and complex, if that was a question.
No, sorry. I'm not suggesting we use Rego instead of cell. The question more was in putting Rego into auth config, like first of all, like what was the reasoning behind putting it in there? And then second of all, it being present, has that highlighted problems that we might face by exposing cell in the API?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so for the reasons we have to go way back in time, right? So that's already ancient history. But only to give some context, Authorino was once started as a POC for almost a wrapper for OPA, right? So the idea was to implement an authorization service that was mainly based in OPA and the Rego language. And then later on, we realized that there were different ways, we could achieve those features, or we could implement those features in different ways and achieve better performance with those, which effectively was the case, right? So now we have some benchmarks comparing with OPA, which shows that OPA is a very good tool for more advanced use cases, but can be a bit overkill for simple ones, right? For simple ones, you are better off with the kind of simpler functionality that we built inside of Authorino. So you wouldn't need Rego for those. And that kind of already answers more or less the question of the risks of doing the same thing now with cell, right? Because I think the same thing applies. If, even though Alex has a good point, we can enable cell with limits, right? We can say it's not the entire thing that cell provides. We can more or less control, right? Like the kind of macros that we enable. So I think it's more modular than open in that regard. So maybe it's safer in that sense. But at the same time, what we're talking about here is possibly expanding something that is very limited, right? I'm talking about our current conditions or language that we have in our policy, right? Into something that it's more powerful by definition. So I don't know. I mean, if we can limit the scope of what we enable from the cell language for users, and I'm only concerned about when we allow users to express things in cell, then maybe we're good. And cell against Rego, cell is it's less powerful and therefore safer in that sense.
Alex, is it okay if I just follow up on that? So I think you make a really good point there, which probably shouldn't miss. One is like auth config and rate limit and limiter door are in the request flow. So the performance is important, right? Like if we evaluate that cell and it's like a really slow evaluation, then we've got to really ask ourselves how important is it to have this expression. But it being in the CRD, like that's not a request time thing. So it doesn't really matter that much if it's a bit slower to process that reconcile, right? So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, so it's exactly what I wanted to say. And then I realized the cell expression itself may actually be the least of your problems, right? So think of, I'm going to pick on limit door because that's probably where I know the best what's going on. Like the whole well-known attributes thing, right? Nothing technically probability of sending all the headers, all the HTTP headers to limit the door and then evaluate something over there with a simple cell expression that just says, oh, is this header present, right? So because of the data flow and how things work today, you could absolutely do that. That'd be stupid because you'd probably like the real power doesn't come from the quote unquote cell expression, but where thing gets evaluated on the request flow, you need to send all that data over. That's where all your budget is going to go. And all of a sudden, right? Creating TCP IP packets to send all that data to limit the door, parse all that string as it goes mentioned, right? Because we need to transform all that into a cell expression like literal for maps and then all over and blah, blah, blah. So all this is where the overhead is going to go, more over the expressiveness itself. Now, the good news is many things that we could do, move that cell expression evaluation all the way into the WASM machine. This, anyway, metrics we can do. So, and I guess that's all the things that I mean with like the power that comes with it. So now back to the that not being on the request flow, right? Like if you have 17 layers of policies that need to be merged and you need to merge those cell expressions, I'm going to use the example that I was trying to explain in the comment that I left on your PRG, right? FN, a function that takes a T and returns a T is perfectly composable, right? So not a problem. And because of the way that defaults and overrides work, you know exactly which FN output is being fed as into the other function's input. So that's all nice and good. But and all those expressions can be fairly simple. Like they don't need to be very complex in terms of time complexity to evaluate, right? But the user that reads those 17 layers and now those functions needs to understand what the outcome, what all the possible outcomes, depending on the initial instance of T that you feed into this function, like all the possible outcomes, it becomes, well, it's not reasonable. Like we humans are not capable of dealing with that kind of, it's not complexity because it is actually fairly simple, but like our brain will not be capable of dealing with that. So that's another sort of power I think that comes with opening that door to those expressions and how we use them that has nothing to do with, say, time and space complexity of evaluating thing, whether on the request flow or not, by the way. I don't think that even matters per se. It's just what it will mean, what all the possible outcomes could be, is just too much. Anyways, arguing against it, even though I still believe it's a very good idea and we should do it.
I also believe we should do it, or at least progress with it, right? As into some kind of, I don't know, POC phase or something like that.
Is there something else we could remove? Like, so we're adding this. Is there something else we can remove? Like, I think your comment is also hinting at that, Alex. And
yeah, that's why I was proposing that. Like maybe like, yeah, I need to apologize to everyone. Like I've been sick the entire weekend and I'm still my brain's still in a very foggy place. So if my comment wasn't entirely clear, that's what I'm trying to do, is effectively remove the strategy aspect of things, the condition aspect of things, and fold that all into a single thing. I'm trying to decomplecting things is what I'm trying to do. The thing that makes me uneasy is that I feel like I'm coming with this nuclear weapon to sort of address everything, which it probably do, but also open the door to all these other things.
Yeah, plus it's much less domain driven in a way, right? Like you need to know more. You don't have this key, like there's nowhere. Like when you see strategy or merge strategy, then you know, kind of, you start thinking, okay, that should mean, I understand what that means. But if I have to come up with that
No,
myself,
yeah, but I don't agree with that premise, right? That's the entire thing. Then all of a sudden, oh yeah, it will work, but not for lists because you cannot sort of. That doesn't mean, well, other than the atomic, I guess that will work. But merging a list like that, I don't have enough information, right? So I don't really agree. I think it looks easy, but it's actually complex, right? So you have this feeling that, oh yeah, that's must be pretty straightforward, but it's not. So I actually believe that the other one is simpler and easier. The thing is, as soon as you start nesting them, right? So, like the example that I took, if you end up with a thing where you have, just think of three functions, right? That sort of fn parentheses fn parentheses fn t, and then all that returns another t. All it did is, manipulate some data. Well, there's a few options now, depending on what all those functions look like, what comes out of there. Right? Think of it. Let me use a simple example with rate limiting. You could express, and I think it's pretty cool when I say it like that, but I also think it's too much. You could express like a base limit, say your per second one, and all the other ones as a function of how the per second looks like. You could express that now with certainly what I'm proposing. Works. And now you can do this as a default so that in case nobody provided any per minute one, the default per minute one will be 100 times the per second one, for instance.
Well, Alex, I could be picking this up wrong, but it sounds like you're kind of suggesting that you could replace the entire Kubernetes API with cell functions. Evaluate the cell function to get the value of this property, right? Or am I misunderstanding?
No, but I'm not sure what you call the Kubernetes API though.
Like ignore rate limit for a second. Say like a deployment, right? Like in theory, you could replace any section of that with a cell function. Is that how I'm understanding it? Right? Or like,
yeah, you're sort of applying the same sort of model to the entire thing. Yes, I'm only proposing that for policies, and I also play devil advocate in the sense I said the entire cell language at any node.
yeah.
But that's open for debate. We can restrict that. You can go. There's many things that you can do, right?
Yeah, I think it's, well, I think, sorry, it's Tuesday and the dog is complaining. I think we can solve some problems here, but like you said, I think we probably need to decide like one or two specific use cases that we want to focus on, and then expand from there over time, rather than like go too far too fast, right? Where like now it's hard to kind of get back from that place ever. Does that make sense? Like, so
yeah, but what's too far and what's
well?
See, that's effectively, I guess that's my whole question.
I really liked the idea of expressing a constraint, because that seemed very natural to me to do that in Cell. When I read it, I was like, that makes sense. Whereas I feel like, and it's a feeling rather than data-driven, that if you were to kind of go to the point of declaring a limit as a cell thing, that feels less natural to me. But that's just my view at this point. I don't really have a reason behind that other than like an instinct. Yeah. So I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know how far is too far, Alex.
So for the rate limiting case, one that I like to try to solve is the clamping
Yeah.
case, right? So where, okay, I need to clamp a value, and right, so it's not like I will refuse your entire policy. Is the one part inside your rate limit policy that's not within those constraints effectively, right? The min-max thing, I will make a call. So let's say you were above, then you're going to go to my above and not the one. Because the one thing that I like to think about, and that's why I think, again, expression are very useful, is because there's a life cycle problem, right? The thing that's above threshold could be there before the constraint appears, or the other way around, so that when the constraint disappears, I want to go back to whatever the larger value was. And yeah, I like that case. I think it's pretty simple, and it's actually applicable then to all the other ones. I just feel that dealing with scalar and numerical values is kind of easier than a Rego expression.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that use case is a really good one. So I guess we go from there.
All right. Is there anything else we want to add on this topic, or are we okay to move on? Okay. So yeah, I think that's the end of what we had down for today. Just to reiterate on the backlog, if you do have anything pressing that you'd like to raise on the call and chat about, don't feel like you need to put on the backlog and wait for someone else to prioritize it. Just go ahead and add it. So for example, the next call, February 27th, if you look at the agenda, there's something you want to raise, just pop in the February 27th date and put your line item underneath there, and we'll prioritize and discuss it. Don't feel like you need to wait or there's a queuing system to do it. If it's important and pressing, we obviously want to try and talk about it. The backlog there is for line items that we should talk about, but we probably don't need to talk about right now. Maybe it's dependent on something or things are progressing in the background. So yeah, just wanted to reiterate that point. So it's not just always the same people adding line items and potentially feeling like folks are jumping the queue. Thomas?
Yeah, just one, like if somebody who's interested, like right now there's the Gateway API call, I believe. So it's European time this week. That's all.
That's at the top of the hour, Thomas, is it?
Yep, it is.
Cool, thanks. Okay, unless there's anything else, we can wrap up there. Thanks all.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.